Since the return of Mr. Donald Trump as President of the United States, there has been a lot of shakeup. He's barely less than 1 month in office. It was sworn in on the 20th of January, and today it's still less than 1 month to when he was officially sworn in for a second term in office. But some of his actions, withdrawal from the WHO, the issues around climate, and those which has to do with government efficiency, and the revelations around United States aid. So you said, rather, that we understand allegations are out there saying that, okay, some of the monies that are being used for enhancing America's soft power through health, diplomatic relationship, sanitation and all of that is getting into the hands of terrorist organizations, including Boko Haram in Nigeria. So these are allegations. We can't verify all of that, but it's something we need to be concerned and talk about because it's an ongoing conversation. We've been joined in the program by geopolitics and human security expert, Mr. Adebayo Adeleke. He joins us from Abuja studio. Mr. Adeleke, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, bright and early.
Okay, Mr. Adeleke.
Thank you for having me.
So since Scott Perry made that revelation from their own investigation, there has been for and against as to whether people believe what he's saying, that Boko Haram is partially or totally or partly or even funded through USAID, given what USAID has done and all the allegations that we're seeing coming forward. In your books, do you believe what he's saying? Is there truth to what he's saying, or is something we need to look deeper into?
So Scott Perry, a former Brigadier General of U.S. Army National Guard, and also the representative congressman from 10th District of Pennsylvania. And if you look at his track record, is it January 6th involvement? Is it, pontificating on, fraud, electoral fraud that never happened? Is it pontificating on some, half-baked truths? I mean, he has a history of doing all that, and he's a Republican. So there's a lot of context. So to answer your question, the truth about it is, when you're talking about USAID funding, it's quite deep and need a lot of reorientation and a lot of revamping. And I think the agency understands that. There's a lot of retooling and whatnot. Is the United States government directly funding Boko Haram? Absolutely not. That particular rumor is unfounded and not substantiated. And I can tell you, matter of fact, I believe I'm probably the most qualified person to talk about it. I've worked with USAID in Afghanistan. I've seen them at work. And also I understand the global war on terror. We don't call it global war on terror no more. So you have to also understand what Scott Perry is saying in context. A lot of these fundings, if you understand the funding mapping from USAID, you will make such statement. And I was online over the weekend, and I saw a lot of the social media is littered with half-baked truth, and a lot of folks are just running with all kind of conspiracy theory. And Scott Perry is a conspiracy theorist as well. So you have to look at some of these things in context. So what he was alluding to is a lot of money that had been sent to countries that always have ISWAP, ISIS, Al Qaeda, Boko Haram of this world over there. And is it a possibility that some of the funding that were given by USAID to a lot of these NGOs find themselves in areas of Boko Haram suppliers? Absolutely. Is USAID doing a lot of work in monitoring and evaluation to make sure that some of this funding are not trickling down to terrorist network? I don't think they're doing enough. So if you can link some of these funds that have been given to the NGOs, because their modus operandi is to actually engage NGOs that does the bidding for them, and those NGOs have ulterior motives. And for the fact that the USAID is not going down to the last mile of the fund distribution, that is some of the issues that they have to contend with. But saying that United States government is directly funding Boko Haram network is not founding, is not substantiated. And I know people will be saying, oh, I've been paid to say such things. It just doesn't make sense. The logic doesn't work. If you understand, and I think a lot of education has to be done here. For you to understand how USAID works, you have to understand the motive behind what stood up USAID. You have to understand the difference between the U.S. national security and the U.S. national interest, the U.S. foreign assistance and the U.S. foreign policy. These things, these constructs are completely different from each other, and you have to understand that in what context they're being used. So once you understand that, it's going to be far-reaching for someone to come online and make such bold statement like Scott Perry did. And it doesn't take much to actually look it online to look at some of the utterances he has made over the course of time. And also, let's not forget Elon Musk at the background with Doge. Scott Perry is a stunt, advocate for Donald Trump, and Donald Trump believes that the USAID is part of the agency that the former government has used to kind of, to impeach him. So he's trying to kind of tear down. And what's the best way to do it is to discredit the agency in all matter necessary. And, Elon Musk owns the algorithm of X, so you can make sure that this news stays online. And, these things are not, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure it out. So that's one thing. You have to understand the funding mapping. And a lot of money that has been given to Nigeria comes through from comes through the foreign affairs ministry. So it doesn't take much to actually map this funding out. But the funding that goes to the NGOs, those funding, oftentimes you don't know how it ends up. And that's where the USAID has to do the thorough work of the last mile delivery of their funds.
What you're saying is based on the facts and your experience. You don't think that this makes sense, but you also say there is some sort of shadow. There's a dark area that is still very vague, and that's where you talk about the NGO. So is that a possibility that this is the channel through which what you call a conspiracy is getting life?
Absolutely. I've worked not only in Nigeria, but I've worked in other countries, Afghanistan, Syria, and whatnot, and I know how this thing works. You have the same supplier that, the U.S. uses and all the terrorists use. It's the only person that does this particular job for them. So it's not too far-fetched to say, this guy is supporting this and that. So, once you start using money across borders in some of these asymmetric warfare, it becomes really, really murky. So using that, but also USAID, I'm not going to go and say that they've not participated in rogue operations before. Absolutely. And those things are some of the things that people are actually according to. But you can use one or two operations that they've done that actually has burned them, and then kind of broad brush. The whole agency has been very rogue. It's quite unfounded, and it's quite unfair to a lot of people that have dedicated their lives, and it's quite unfair for a lot of people that have lost their life. The same U.S. military lost soldiers in Niger in the fight against Boko Haram. And if you remember, a couple of soldiers, black soldiers, actually died. The part of the 3rd Special Forces Group in Niger died because of, fighting Boko Haram. So it is quite oxymoronic in sometimes when you read some of these comments. And more importantly, will the government continue to, knowingly fund the same network that is actually sending soldiers to fight? It doesn't make sense. A lot of us lost friends and families in this fight, any part of the world. And I have my own, trust me, I have my own issues with USAID about some of their operations globally and how they do some of this stuff. But to say that they knowingly fund some of these things is bogus. And I can call Scott Perry out on any day on this. It's all interest driven. And if any of the Nigerian youths and all of us have actually attended any of this congressional hearing, and if any Nigerian in the U.S. has attended some of this hearing, you understand how this thing plays out. It's all politics. It's a game of influence. Try to poison people's mind and try to drive home, have big truth, stretch truth, unfounded truths, whatever can stick. And it's just the nature of the game. Unfortunately, it is what it is.
All right, Mr. Adeleke, I totally understand you, and I'm trying as much as possible for us not to get into their local politics. Anybody who is discerning enough can see barefaced politics in some of these things, but what concerns us is how it affects us at the end of the day, which is where we need your intervention, because it's literally upsetting what some people call the NGO economy. Some are pushing the context of the fact that the goodwill that USAID gets enhances America's soft power. But how should the Nigerian government approach this allegation made by some official at the Congress that some of this funding, as you said, there's a possibility that some of this funding could get into the wrong hands? How should we approach it as a people and as a government?
Thank you. I think one thing that needs to happen is the last mile delivery of the funds. That's where the rubber meets the road. How do we make sure that the government tighten up the NGOs? NGOs have worked loosely in Nigeria, and I don't think they are being checked. What are you doing? Who's getting your funds? And more importantly, I think the indictment is also on the USAID. They can use the MCC, the Millennium Corporation method, whereby they can train their own. Well, it's just time consuming. It takes about 5 years. They can train their own local partners, and they can monitor them, from point A to point B, from cradle to grave. But the USAID doesn't have that time. The flash to bank is quite quick. So they have to rely on government. And I believe they're working, and they have offices in Nigeria and other countries as well. I think the last mile has to be dealt with in such a way that they work with Nigerian government to tighten up the NGO rules and how those NGO work in areas, AOR, and work with the theater commander, be like, look, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, and they can audit their trails. Because if these things are not done, you will continue to, money is a very interesting thing when it continues to filter down in the dark places. And I've seen it time and time again. So Nigeria is not unique to this. In other parts of the world that we work for, we see how money, with good intent, kind of end up in the bad hands.
Well, that's the irony, really. Money with good intent should naturally not end up in the wrong hands, because you with the good intent should ensure that it gets to the right person, or at least the right place. And that's the least we can ask for with that good intent. But we're still left with the big question. So who's funding Boko Haram? Who's funding ISWAP? Who's funding these terrorist groups? Because obviously there is good funding coming towards them. And you know these things. You see the kind of ammunitions they have. Sometimes we've heard soldiers say once they hear those guys coming, they just take cover. They don't even try to return fire or shoot at them, because they know once they get them, they have superior firepower in some cases. So we still have that big question, right? And we've not answered it. The CDS has been on and on about it, seeking some sort of international help to uncover these funders. So that's still a question we've not answered. How do you expect us to get answers to that very important question? One, and secondly, would you advise the U.S. government, if you had a sit down, let's say, to recommend USAID operations? By the way, in 2023 alone, Nigeria got over, I think, $800 million from USAID. And people look around and they say they don't even see the impact. So two questions in one, Mr. Deleke.
So the first questions. In any network, follow the money. The money trail is where it is, and the Nigerian government needs to work closely. It's all about leverages and interest. And I can tell you for a fact, if this government really wants to dig down, it might take a while to get where these funds are, and they know where those money are coming from. You can follow the trail. Once follow the money, you're able to understand it. And I know General Chris Musa knows that as well, and every one of us that work in security network knows it. Oftentimes, some of those things, connecting the dot, is quite difficult, because they don't use the normal financial network. They use different nodes. I'm a supply chain guy, so I understand these things. Different methodologies across borders. Cash flows, different minerals to actually move commodity and to trade value. So all these things can make it extremely difficult. But if a task force has been, it can be initiated, and both on the Nigerian side and other countries involved, and involving the NGOs as well, and where they are getting their funds from, I think you can narrow it down to a particular few where these things are funding from. And don't get it twisted. They're well funded, and you might be surprised at the end of the day that this might be the real thing, the answer you're asking might be hiding in plain sight. Oftentimes it's like that too as well. So with my knowledge, I cannot say categorically who and who, but I believe the people in authority have a slight idea who he is, who the persons are rather. On the second question, on the NGO part, if I get you right, can you repeat the last question? I just want to make sure I haven't.
The question is,
I want to answer it to the best.
With all of the, I think, the cry about how this will affect not just U.S.'s soft power, but the aid that this USAID is meant to provide to the vulnerable in other parts of the world, would you advise the U.S. government to restart USAID's operations across the world?
Absolutely. I think Mark Rubio, who is a stump supporter of USAID and foreign assistance aid, it's not saying that USAID is going away. I think it's going to remain under the State Department. The U.S. soft power will continue. And again, as I said earlier, you have to understand the U.S. national interest. The national interest for the U.S. is to be able to provide trade. And one of the U.S. national interests is to have uninterrupted trade. And for that to happen, you have to be able to do it in countries that are stable. And for that to happen, foreign assistance is needed in areas that are especially in this particular point in time, critical minerals is one of the big issue of U.S. national interest. For Nigeria is a big player in there, and ability to stabilize Nigeria is one of the is one of the key interests of the United States government. Contrary to what people believe right now, is actually that's why they are funding a lot. And I believe in less than 90 days, I believe the funds will be opened up again. And now, what caused all this uproar is the fact that the current USAID administrator do not want some kind of sense of accountability. And I think that is being rethink this time around. And I think at the end of it all, there will be a lot of reevaluation of USAID operations and realignment. Right. And above all, the soft money will continue to flow back to kind of go after the U.S. national interest and foreign policies.
Mr. Adeleke, there's a lot to actually deal with, but for the want of time, because we've heard reports of some of these activities, and I'm happy you mentioned the fact that there are possibilities of monies going to the wrong hands. When you go to the north, we have reports of people, these NGOs booking hotels for years, as though they know something we do not know. I know the CDS has actually mentioned the fact that when they began to probe the activities of NGOs, say, you don't want us to check, but we have to check how you're doing your work. We're not stopping you from doing your great work. But he said, according to the CDS, when they began to check the activities of NGOs, the level of atrocity being committed by these guys kind of reduced because of the kind of feed they get allegedly from some of these NGOs. So it's an ongoing conversation. There's also another layer of the conversation that has to do with Nigeria as a country partially depending on some of these aid for fundamentals, which can shock us like we're experiencing today. But Mr. Adeleke, thank you so much for your perspective. We have to bring you back at some other time to break it down for us even further.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Mr. Adebayo Adeleke is an expert in geopolitics and human security. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you.
And we'll now take a quick break. When we come back, we'll bring you another leg of the program. Is packed for today, and so we have to be breezy. Join us again.